The cry was so small it almost didn't exist, yet it carried all the weight of a life slipping away. It trembled in the frozen air, thin and broken, like the last thread of a song before it snaps. It wasn't loud, but it was the kind of sound that made your heart hurt in places you didn't know existed. Whoever it came from was cold, so cold that even their voice seemed to shiver. Lily stopped mid-step. The wicker basket in her mittened hand swung gently at her side, forgotten. Her breath puffed in the air, each cloud vanishing into the steel-gray sky. She was only 5, but she knew, deep down, that this was not the sound of someone calling for help. This was the sound of someone running out of time. If you're a true Wild West soul, drop a big yes in the comments. Let's see who's still riding the trail with us. The wind knifed through the narrow village street, snatching away the last echoes of the cry. Frost clung to every roof and every fence like shards of broken glass, and the chimneys puffed out smoke that froze before it could rise. Doors were shut tight. Windows were dark. It was as if the whole world had decided to turn away from whatever was happening beyond the edge of the village. Her mother's voice whispered in her head, firm but kind. "Straight to the baker, Lily. Don't stop for anything." But then it came again, softer now, a fraying whisper of pain, and Lily felt something twist hard in her chest. She turned her head toward the forest. The trees stood like a wall of black against the pale sky, their branches reaching upward like bony fingers. Her grandmother's stories rose unbidden in her mind, tales of the people who lived there, the ones who could speak to the wind and vanish without leaving a footprint. People you weren't supposed to follow. Another cry, barely there this time, as if whoever made it was almost gone. Her feet moved before she even decided. One step, then another. The bakery's warm golden light faded behind her, replaced by the silent, watching forest. The cold bit deep into her skin, but she didn't care. Somewhere in those shadows was someone whose voice was breaking in the snow, and Lily knew she could not leave them there. The bread was still warm in her basket, its scent curling up into the icy air, when Lily heard it again, the cry she'd first heard that morning. Fainter now, almost lost beneath the wind, but still there. She stopped in the middle of the snowy path, her breath catching. The sound was coming from the edge of the forest, from beyond the last crooked fence that marked the village boundary. Her mother's voice filled her head, warning her not to stray. But the cry came again, and it was so weak, so broken, that it made her feet move without thinking. She left the path, snow crunching beneath her boots, the wind tugging at her scarf. The forest loomed closer with every step, its dark branches curling overhead like arms ready to close around her. Then she saw them, half hidden in the shadow of a great pine. A young woman sat on the frozen ground. Her hair was long and black, tangled with snowflakes, and her skin was the color of warm earth. She wore a thin dress, the fabric torn and stiff with frost, and she clutched a tiny bundle to her chest. The bundle moved, letting out a sound so small it barely reached Lily's ears. The baby. Its face was red from the cold, lips trembling, eyes squeezed shut. The woman rocked it gently, her arms shaking, not from movement, but from the violent shivers racking her body. Her breath came in clouds, uneven and quick, and when she looked up at Lily, her eyes were wide, dark pools of exhaustion and fear. For a moment, neither moved. Lily felt the cold burrow deep into her bones, but it was nothing compared to the sight in front of her. The woman's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. She simply tightened her hold on the baby, as though the tiny weight in her arms was all of that kept her tethered to the world. Without a second thought, Lily set her basket in the snow and pulled the blanket from her own shoulders, a thick wool one her grandmother had made for her, stitched with careful hands on long winter nights. The cold bit at her instantly, sharp as knives, but she stepped forward and wrapped the blanket around the baby, tucking it under the woman's arms. The woman's gaze followed her movements, something unspoken passing between them. A flicker of relief softened her eyes. She murmured something in a language Lily didn't understand. The words soft and low, like a prayer whispered into the snow. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the sound away. Lily took a step back, her hands now empty, the cold seeping into her chest. The woman held the baby tighter, pulling the blanket close, and for the briefest moment she smiled. It was small, but it was enough. Lily turned toward the village, her heart heavy and warm all at once. She didn't know why, but she felt she had just done something that would never be forgotten. The cold clawed at her the moment she pulled the blanket from her shoulders. The wool had been holding in what little warmth she had managed to keep, and now the wind rushed in, slicing through her coat as though it were paper. Her breath turned sharp in her throat, but she didn't stop. The blanket was heavy in her hands, smelling faintly of the cedar chest where her grandmother kept it before gifting it to her last winter. Each stitch was tight and careful, the yarn thick, dyed in deep reds and browns. Her grandmother's hands had worked for days to make it, humming the soft, wordless tune she always sang when she made something meant to keep someone safe. It was the warmest thing Lily owned. She knelt in the snow and wrapped it gently around the baby. The tiny body was light, almost weightless, but so cold she feared it might slip away if she didn't act quickly. She tucked the blanket around its head and shoulders, then pulled the edges together until only the baby's face showed, its cheeks mottled pink and pale, its small mouth quivering as it gave one last whimper before settling into silence. The young mother's eyes followed every movement, wide and unblinking. Her lips trembled, but not just from the cold. When Lily's hands withdrew, the woman's grip closed tight around the bundle, holding it close to her chest, as though she feared the world might try to take it away. Lily sat back on her heels, the snow soaking through her skirt, the wind pressing icy fingers against her skin. The cold was biting deeper now. Her scarf was loose, and she shivered so hard it felt like her bones might shake apart. But the sight in front of her, a baby no longer gasping, a mother's shoulders relaxing ever so slightly, was enough to push the ache from her mind. The woman spoke, her voice low and soft, carrying the sounds Lily didn't understand. The words had a rhythm to them, like fallen snow, and though Lily couldn't make sense of them, she felt their meaning all the same. Gratitude, relief, a quiet promise. The baby stirred, a small hand escaping from the fold of the blanket, fingers curling and uncurling as if testing the warmth now wrapped around it. The woman pulled the hand back in, pressing a kiss to the tiny forehead. Lily's teeth chattered as she stood, her legs stiff from the cold. The bread sat in her basket where she had left it, a small reminder of the errand she had abandoned. She picked it up, feeling the heat from the loaf had faded, and glanced one last time at the mother and child. Snow began to fall, thin and silent, dust in the blanket she had given away. She knew she would return home colder than she had ever been, but in her chest there was a warmth that no winter wind could touch. The woman's eyes held her in place, dark and deep. They seemed to search right through her, as if trying to understand how a child, barely tall enough to reach the kitchen shelf, could give away the one thing that might keep her warm. The snowflakes caught in her lashes melted into thin lines of water on her cheeks, though whether from the cold or something else, Lily couldn't tell. She tightened her arms around the baby, pulling the blanket up to shield its face from the wind. For a long moment, she simply stared at Lily, breathing in short, uneven bursts. Then she spoke. The words were quiet, almost carried away by the air between them. They rolled softly like water over smooth stones, full of a music Lily had never heard before. Lily didn't understand. but the tone told her enough. The woman's voice was warm despite the cold, each sound wrapped in something gentle and sure. It felt like thanks, like a blessing. Lily's chest ached with it, even if she couldn't hold on to the meaning of the words themselves. The woman's hand, thin and trembling, reached out, not to take but to touch. Her fingers brushed the sleeve of Lily's coat for the briefest moment, as if to make sure she was real. Then she pulled back, holding the baby tighter, her gaze lingering for one last silent message before she turned her eyes toward the forest. Lily took a step backward. The cold was gnawing at her now, seeping deep into her bones. She bent to pick up her basket, the bread inside no longer warm. A single snowflake landed on the crust, melting instantly. Her teeth chattered as she began to walk, the path back to the village seeming longer than before. With each step, her mind replayed her mother's face when she had left that morning, the soft, careful way she had fastened Lily's coat, the reminder not to stop for anything. She imagined the questions that would come. "Where's your blanket, Lily? Why did you give it away?" And the cold truth, she didn't know if her mother would be angry or simply worried. The wind pushed against her as she crossed into the village again. Chimney smoke curled sluggishly in the air, and the windows glowed faintly in the dim afternoon light. The smell of baking bread drifted from the bakery, richer now that she was closer, but it didn't chase away the weight sitting in her chest. When she reached her own door, she paused, the snow crunching under her boots. Her fingers hesitated on the latch. Inside there was warmth, and her mother's voice, and the life she had always known. Behind her, somewhere at the edge of the forest, there was a young mother holding her baby, wrapped in the only blanket Lily had ever called her own. She took a breath and stepped inside. By morning, the story had already taken flight. It began as a murmur over the baker's counter, passed from the man who had seen Lily returning home without her blanket to the woman buying flour. By the time the church bells tolled noon, the murmur had threaded through every doorway and drifted into every ear. They said the little Miller girl had gone to the forest edge and given her blanket to a woman of the Ravenwing tribe. The name alone stirred something in the villagers, an old, unsettled mix of fascination and unease. The Ravenwing were not seen often, and when they were, they came like shadows at the very edges of sight. They hunted in the deep woods, spoke in their own quiet tongue, and moved with a grace that seemed almost unearthly. There were stories, tales of them speaking to the wind, of their arrows finding their mark even in darkness, of debts they never forgot. Some whispered that Lily's kindness was foolish. "She's a child," muttered old Mr. Renner, shaking his head outside the smithy. "She doesn't understand who they are. The Ravenwing take what they need, always have." Others lowered their voices not out of fear, but awe. Mrs. Ainsworth, the midwife, told the butcher's wife that such an act might mean something. "They don't forget kindness," she said, glancing toward the forest. "And if they remember, they repay. That's their way." Children gathered in small knots in the snowy streets, eyes wide, repeating the story in their own embellished versions. In one telling, Lily had been surrounded by a whole band of Ravenwing warriors. In another, the baby she saved was the chief's son. Lily walked through it all with her basket clutched tight, feeling the weight of every glance. The grown-ups didn't stop her to ask, but she could hear them speaking as soon as her back was turned. Even the blacksmith's hammer paused when she passed his doorway. At home, her mother moved quietly, her hands busy with chores, but Lily could feel the questions hiding behind her eyes. No scolding had come, not yet. Just a silence that was heavier than any words. That night, as the wind rattled the shutters, Lily lay under the thin quilt that now had to replace her blanket. The room felt colder without its familiar weight. She thought of the young mother's face, the way her eyes had softened when the blanket settled around the baby. She wondered if they were still at the forest's edge, or if the snow had covered their tracks entirely. Somewhere outside, an owl called low and haunting. In the distance, beyond the reach of the village lights, the forest waited, dark, endless, and filled with stories. And now, Lily realized, she was part of one of them. The snow had fallen thick in the days since, blanketing the village in white so deep that footsteps vanished within hours. Life had settled into its quiet winter rhythm, until the morning the Ravenwing came. It began with the dogs. They started barking before the sun had fully risen, their sharp cries carrying through the still air. People stepped out onto their porches, squinting into the pale light, and there they were, 5 figures moving slowly down the main road. They wore clothing unlike anything the villagers had seen up close. Long fur-lined cloaks that brushed the snow, beads that caught the weak sunlight, and boots stitched with intricate patterns. Feathers, black as the wing of a raven, were woven into their braids. Each step was deliberate, silent except for the soft crunch of snow beneath them. The villagers watched from behind doors and windows, the air tense with the weight of old stories. The Ravenwing never came into the village without reason. At the front was a tall man whose presence seemed to still the very air. His dark hair was streaked with silver, and around his neck hung a pendant carved from bone. He stopped in the square, his gaze sweeping over the watching faces. When he spoke, his voice was deep and steady, carrying without effort. "We seek," he said, pausing as his eyes moved from person to person, "the girl with the golden heart." A ripple went through the crowd. Whispers rose instantly, darting from mouth to mouth. Some looked toward the baker's shop, others toward the miller's house. All of them knew. Lily stood half hidden behind her mother's skirts at the edge of the square, her mittened hands clenched together. She felt every eye turned toward her, the weight of their stares pressing against her chest. Her mother's hand found her shoulder, firm but not pulling her back. The tall man's gaze settled on her. For a moment he didn't move, simply studying her with eyes that seemed to see far more than just a small, shivering girl. Then slowly he crossed the snow until he stood only a few steps away. "You are the one," he said, not as a question, but as a truth already known. "The child who gave warmth where there was none." Lily's throat tightened. She nodded, unable to find her voice. The man inclined his head, and one of the women behind him stepped forward. She carried something wrapped in cloth, holding it as carefully as if it were glass. "Our chief sends this," the man said, "for the life you saved." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Lily barely heard them. Her heart pounded in her ears as the woman knelt and began to unwrap the bundle, the contents hidden from view. The snowflakes swirled down around them, silent witnesses to whatever was about to be revealed. The woman's hands moved with slow care, folding back the cloth to reveal not gold nor silver, but something far more unexpected. A small woven sash, its patterns alive with color. Reds, deep blues, and warm earth tones interlaced in shapes Lily had never seen before. The air around the square seemed to still as the man spoke. "This," he said, "is a mark of welcome. The Ravenwing give it only to those they call friend." The murmurs began again, but softer now, tinged with something more than curiosity. The tall man turned to Lily's parents, his gaze steady. "Our camp lies beyond the ridge," he continued. "The girl's heart is known among us. We invite her and her family to share our fire and our food, to see how we live, to know we are not as the old fears say." The words fell into the cold air like stones into still water, sending ripples through the crowd. Invitations from the Ravenwing were rare. Most villagers went their whole lives without such an offer. And yet, the old stories clung stubbornly to memory, whispered warnings of the forest, of what lay beyond the safe edge of the fields. Lily's father glanced at her mother. A silent exchange passed between them, one of measured caution and something deeper. gratitude. They knew the truth of what had happened at the forest's edge, even if others clung to superstition. "We will come," her father said finally, his voice steady but low, "in thanks and in trust." A flicker of approval crossed the man's face. He inclined his head, and the woman holding the sash stepped forward. She knelt before Lily and placed it gently in her hands. The wool was softer than she expected, warm despite the cold. Her fingers traced the strange, beautiful patterns, and she felt as if she were holding something more than cloth, something alive with meaning. The Ravenwing leader spoke once more. "3 mornings from now, we will meet you at the edge of the forest." His words were final, but not unkind. As they turned to leave, the villagers parted for them, some stepping back with wariness, others watching with quiet awe. The 5 figures moved away as they had arrived, silent, unhurried, their forms fading into the snow, until they were nothing more than shadows among the trees. That night, the whispers in the village shifted. Some still clung to suspicion, but others spoke of possibilities, bridges where there had once been only distance. Lily sat by the fire, the sash across her knees. Its colors glowed in the flicker of the flames, and she imagined the camp beyond the ridge, the smoke rising from unfamiliar fires, the sound of voices in a language she didn't know, the faces of people who had called her friend. She didn't feel fear, only a pull, gentle but certain, toward whatever waited beyond the forest. The forest seemed different when they entered it as guests. 3 mornings later, the Ravenwing waited at the edge of the trees, their forms still and patient against the pale dawn. Without a word, they began to lead Lily and her parents along a narrow path where the snow lay untouched except for the tribe's own footprints. The village sounds faded behind them, replaced by the low creak of branches heavy with frost and the soft murmur of a stream running beneath ice. The camp appeared suddenly, as though it had always been there, hidden until it wished to be seen. Smoke rose in thin spirals from fire pits. Tents of hides and woven mats stood in a wide circle, their entrances facing inward. Children's laughter carried in the cold air, mingling with the scent of cooking meat. Lily's eyes darted everywhere, drinking in the colors, the patterns, the way the people moved with a quiet rhythm, as if each step belonged to the earth itself. Some paused to look at her, not with suspicion, but with curiosity, and something else she couldn't quite name. The tall man from before led them to the largest tent. Inside it was warm and dim, lit by the glow of a central fire. Around it sat the elders, their faces lined and strong, eyes dark as polished stone. The young mother Lily had met was there too, the baby sleeping soundly in her arms, swaddled still in the familiar blanket. One of the elders spoke, his voice deep but gentle. "You came to the edge of the forest, child, and you gave warmth where there was only cold." His gaze rested on the blanket, then returned to Lily. "In our way, this is not a small thing. To give warmth to a child is to give life. And when that life is given, a bond is formed that cannot be broken." Another elder, a woman with silver hair braided into a crown, leaned forward. "You have given the child your own warmth. In doing so, you have joined her to you, and yourself to her. From this day, you are of our family." Lily blinked, the meaning settling over her slowly, like the fall of snow. "Family?" she whispered. The silver-haired woman smiled. "In our hearts and in our name, you are sister to the child, daughter to us all. You will always have a place by our fire." Her mother's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, and when Lily glanced up, she saw that her mother's eyes were wet. Her father gave a small nod, as if to say he understood the weight of what had been given. The young mother came forward then, kneeling before Lily. She spoke softly in her own language, but the way she took Lily's hands and pressed them to her heart told her everything. In the warmth of the fire, with the blanket glowing in the firelight, Lily realized something. She had not lost her blanket at all. She had simply given it a new home, one that now belonged to her too. The next morning, the camp was alive with quiet purpose. People moved in and out of the largest tent, their arms full of bundles wrapped in hides. The air was sharper now, the frost clinging to the edges of every branch, but the fires burned bright, and the smell of cedar smoke lingered everywhere. Lily had been sitting by the fire with the young mother and her baby when the tall man approached. He carried something in his arms, wrapped in a piece of soft deerskin. When he stopped before her, the camp seemed to fall into a hush. Slowly, with the same reverence the woman had shown when unwrapping the sash in the village square, he peeled back the hide to reveal a robe unlike anything Lily had ever seen. The fabric was thick and warm, woven in deep shades of red and black, threaded with rare golden fibers that caught the morning light like sunlight trapped in cloth. Patterns wound through it in shapes she could not name, mountains, rivers, wings, all telling a story only the Raven Wing could read. "This," the man said, "is for you. It is made by many hands over many days and holds the work and blessing of our people. Wear it, and you will never walk without warmth and never be without family." Lily reached out, her fingers brushing the soft weave. It was heavier than she expected, but not in a way that weighed her down. More like it anchored her, wrapping her in something ancient and unbreakable. She pulled it around her shoulders, and it fit as though it had always been meant for her. But the gifts did not end there. The Raven Wing began bringing forward more bundles, woven baskets filled with dried meat, jars of herbs, salves, and roots that smelled of earth and healing, fur blankets, carefully tanned hides, and tools shaped from bone and wood. Each item was placed gently before Lily's parents. "These are for your people," the silver-haired elder said, her voice firm but warm. "The winter is long, and no neighbor should suffer, while another has plenty." Lily's father's voice was quiet when he spoke. "You honor us," he said, bowing his head slightly. Her mother could only nod, her hand resting on Lily's back as if to steady herself. The villagers had often spoken of the Raven Wing in half-shadows, through stories worn thin with fear and distance. Now Lily imagined the look on their faces when they saw the tribe coming. Not with silent steps through snow, but with arms full of food, warmth, and medicine. The tall man placed a final bundle in Lily's lap. Inside was a small pouch, stitched with the same golden thread as her robe. "For you alone," he said. When she peeked inside, she found a tiny carving of a bird in flight, its wings spread wide. That night, under the stars above the camp, Lily sat wrapped in her new robe. The fire crackled, the baby slept, and she realized that sometimes, when you give away something precious, it returns to you, only far greater than before. The winter that followed was unlike any the village had known. When the Raven Wing first came down from the forest with their gifts, the villagers watched with cautious eyes. But suspicion gave way to something warmer as the days passed. The food and medicine eased the harshness of the cold months, and the blankets and furs kept the bitter winds from biting so deeply. For the first time in living memory, the people of the village spoke of the Raven Wing not in whispers, but in gratitude. Lily visited the camp often, her new robe marking her as someone who belonged in both worlds. She learned the tribe's songs, soft and low, sung around the fire as sparks drifted into the night sky. She listened to the elders' stories, their voices weaving tales of the mountains and rivers, of the great ravens that guided their people. She learned to braid reeds into baskets, to recognize the herbs that healed, and to walk silently over snow without leaving a trace. The young mother, whose name Lily learned was Anka, became like an older sister. The baby she had wrapped in her blanket that cold morning grew strong, toddling after her through the camp, laughing with the unguarded joy of a child who had never known that first freezing danger. Seasons turned. The snow melted into the rushing streams of spring, and summer brought green fields and long evenings. Each year, Lily's bond with the Raven Wing deepened, and the distance between the village and the forest grew smaller. Trade replaced fear. Stories were shared at festivals. The villagers taught the Raven Wing how to mend fishing nets. The Raven Wing taught the villagers how to track deer and predict the weather by the wind. By the time Lily was nearly grown, it was hard to remember a time when the two communities had been strangers. People moved freely between them, their paths worn smooth by countless footsteps. And whenever anyone asked how such a friendship had begun, the answer was always the same: because a small girl once gave away her blanket. On a crisp autumn evening years later, Lily stood on the ridge between the village and the forest, the robe still warm on her shoulders. Below her, lights from both the campfires and the cottage windows flickered in the dusk, their glow mingling until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Anka's boy, no longer a baby, but a tall, laughing child, ran up beside her, pointing toward the stars just beginning to appear. Lily smiled, remembering that bitter winter morning when the world had been cold and divided. It seemed impossible now that so much had changed because of something so small. But maybe, she thought, kindness was never truly small. Like fire, it could be passed from one to another until even the darkest night was lit. And in that quiet moment, with the wind carrying the scent of smoke from both village and camp, Lily knew the connection would last for generations. That's the end of the trail, folks. Drop a yes if you're a true Wild West fan. Thanks for riding with me.